Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Parenting is Easy, Said No One Ever. I'm your host, Chananya Abraham, and I just want to first shout out everyone that has sent messages through our social media, through emailing, which is parentingiseasy@gmail.com. Really helped us get so many different points of view that I think are really helpful, and I look forward to being able to work on these new topics that you guys have sent in. So thank you so much for that. So today we have an awesome conversation that I had with Kellie, who is a mom of one and who unfortunately lost her husband and also her mom while she was pregnant, and her husband within the first year of her son being born. And I think there's so many areas when it comes to grief, when it comes to loss, when it comes to how to navigate things, both personally, which is a big thing that we talk about, and also with our child, and also together. So many different areas within that I'm so happy we had a chance to talk about, that I think that there's so many things that we can learn, even if you are a two-family household, or if you haven't experienced loss of a spouse. So many different areas when it comes to how to deal with therapy, how to deal with emotions, how to deal with imaginary friends. This is not a plug for Ish, but how to deal with things in a way where we can all be on the same page. And it's also okay to have emotions that are not necessarily always good, and that's okay. And so I'm so glad to share this amazing interview with you, with Kellie. And please look forward to her book that's coming out soon as well. We're going to have all of the links in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, please follow us and click like anywhere that you are listening to this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I really appreciate this. This is something we were working on for a while, and the people we're going to be talking about today is something that is really important, an area that we have not talked about on the podcast yet. I think one that's really helpful and insightful in so many different ways. So as we get started, before I ask questions, maybe talk a little bit about you and how you sort of got to where you are today.
So I originally I went to school for writing, and I got my degree in Bachelor's of Arts with a focus in creative writing and creative literature. And I wrote a children's book. It wasn't really my initial path, but my mom had died when I was pregnant with my son, and then his father died about a year later. So I kind of just, life happened, and it just ended up being the way that I was going to write a book about children's grief, because I couldn't find one for my son that really fit with our family. So It's pretty kind of just, happened.
So okay, there's a lot there obviously to unpack. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is obviously this topic of grief, which is what we're going to be talking about today. I'm curious, let's say from the way you grew up, or maybe the way you perceive things and the way you look at the word grief, how is it different today than it was, say, a couple of years ago?
I don't think it's that different. I mean, I never experienced any big losses until I was probably like 12 or 13. I don't think death was really talked about a lot as a kid. I think now more so I'm seeing, more open dialogue with therapy, and, everyone's lives are just so different now, the way technology is and social media. But, I mean, even for my son, like I didn't see a lot. He was 1 when his dad passed away. He's almost 9 now. And there's really not, I mean, there's a few books, and, therapy has been helpful for us, but there's just a big gap. Nobody really wants to talk about death with kids.
Yeah. So what has been something that has been really helpful for you over the past 8-9 years?
Therapy. Honestly, I mean, we do it together and do it individually. It's just not knowing how to describe your emotions, I think, is one of the biggest hurdles. I think adults have a hard time with it, and let alone children. So, that's been a huge focus for us, just, using emotion words and, trying to figure out what we're feeling. And, that's pretty much like the basis of how it works for us.
Yeah, I think that's you're so open and honest about it, which I think is something that I wish people that excuse me, not just coming to my office, but I think in general, when we talk about the concepts of grief, and the word that comes to mind that you're bringing up is resilience. Whether it's something that you attribute to yourself or not, but I think it's something that where you talk about regarding you being able to say, right, this is what we need to do. This is what my son and I need to do. And we need to do it together, individually, and just make it something that this is the norm. I think kids are so modeled by the home that they grew up in that whatever is normal, they will do. Yeah. So, I think when you talk about this concept, and maybe you could expand it a little more, we talk about grief and resilience. What's that connection for you, and how have you sort of like found that strength to be able to do the things that you need to do so that you can have this family that you have right now?
I mean, it's been a long road to get here. I think, the first couple of years, I was just like thrust into being a new mom without my mom and then being a solo parent, which has a whole thing to come along with it anyway. Especially when there's not another individual, taking 50%, in divorces, whatever. It's just I'm mom and dad all of the time. So I really had to find a way to navigate my own grief, to not put my storm on my son. I just think it's really important. We have a very open communication with each other. Grief and death is a very welcome topic to talk about. He's felt comfortable growing up talking about it because, unfortunately, it's kind of what our lives were shaped around.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, it's hard. Sometimes when I talk to other people, they're like, I'll say what happened, and they're like, oh my God, like I forget. And that it's kind of like jarring to hear about, but it's just our norm.
So when you talk about for yourself, and you were the keyword over here of, you showing grief for your son and being able to have that sense of mommy's going through this too. I think that's something that, you can have a situation where a parent is hurting about something and there's something not going well for them, and that's okay. So I'm curious, in as many words, but how do you actually give that over? What's that message to your son that you're able to go ahead and say, yeah, mom is going through things right now, and that's okay. And we're going through this together, and we're also doing this individually. But I think the thing that you're saying as well is that you have to figure out how to make sure to be there for your son, not only as a mom, but also as a dad. And then on top of that, say, okay, I have to focus on my grieving right now because I need to deal with something with my son. What's that balance? And how do you go about making sure that you give each one of those? I'm looking at this picture on my head right now, like one of those divider plates, where you have like different things in different areas, and being able to know that there are different areas that I'm supposed to be doing different things. So what's that balance? And how do you go about making sure that each area of that plate gets its, I guess, the right attention that it needs?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, sometimes I just have to push my stuff aside and compartmentalize. Like, I got to deal with this later, But, he's seen me upset. Like, we'll go to the cemetery on special occasions and, he sees me cry. And I think that's important for kids to see their parents have emotion, so they could have it too. For a little while there, he was kind of like, oh, boys don't cry and, this and that. But I think now as he's gotten older, he's like, okay, well, crying is okay. And like, if I'm feeling XYZ, like I can express that, and I think, using emotion words for him have been really helpful. Imaginary friends has been very helpful for him, to, kind of like put one in each compartment of a feeling. And that's been super helpful as he's gotten a little older.
So being able to have like putting the emotion, excuse me, somewhere, right? And being able to go ahead and say that, all right, this right now, what we're feeling is attributed to this, or in this, let's say, physical imaginary friend in a certain way. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that process is like, and how you would talk about that to your son, and maybe how other parents can sort of talk about that with their children?
Yeah, I mean, he's gotten big into the imaginary friend thing, I think, because that movie that came out this year called If, which was super cute. But, he'll come up with an imaginary friend and he'll design like a certain drawing of them. And he's like, okay, when I'm feeling nervous, like he's going to be there. He did swimming lessons. He's like, if I'm scared to go underwater, he's going to be there with me watching to make sure that I'm not scared. It's so, if I'm angry, this is the guy I'm going to talk about. Or if I'm happy, it's, if he has one for each, which has been super cute, but it's also really helpful. And even his therapist is like, I'm loving this.
Yeah. It's great. And I think also the fact, and not this is any plug for the movie If, and I have not seen it, but I've heard amazing things about just for this concept itself. It can make a imaginary world, which is such an important part of the developmental for a child, especially if they need it for something as in grieving, so that they could associate it and feel comfort and feel good about themselves. Yeah. And it's so helpful. So there's a certain amount that it's very, very necessary for a child to have. And at the same time, and I'm not sure if it's something that you've thought about yet, or maybe with your therapist, or maybe something to think about for the future, there's a certain time as well to have a transition to come out of that. And for it to be something that it's not necessarily something that we would associate it all the time. I'm curious if that's something that you thought about, or is that something that is on the table for the future? And how would you go about transitioning from the way to associate grief with this imaginary friend and then maybe going towards something else or processing it out in another way.
Yeah, we have talked about that. He's been very interested in writing, just because of all the commotion of my book coming out. He's been writing his own books, but I think we talked about journaling a little bit as he's gotten older to, keep a journal of, his feelings if he's not wanting to talk about things. So I think as he gets older, I think that might be his route.
That's amazing. I think that one thing, at least, hearing you talk about like different things over here, whether it's an imaginary friend or journaling, I hope parents are realizing this, that there is no one way that is the right way. There's a way that works for your child. And it's being curious together with them regarding exploring, all right, let's do this. Let's try this. Maybe it's, for some people, it might be getting an animal and that could be helpful, or music, or playing music. There's so many different things out there. And I don't want to say too many more examples. I don't want to limit it to just the examples I'm saying. And I think it's so important for parents to realize that there are so many different ways to grieve. And there's so many different ways that we can have our kids help them communicate their own emotions and feelings. And I'm curious, when we talk about resilience, that's we started with regarding resilience of self and how to deal with grief, but we're dealing with the resilience aspect of a child having to deal with things on their own regarding the things that they're dealing with. I'm curious, how would you go about talking about that with a parent that would allow them to be able to explore on their own, but with, mom or dad being able to be on the sidelines so that they can have that self-identity and autonomy with their own feelings?
Yeah, I think just be as open as possible about how you can age appropriately with death, depending on what had happened. But, for him, it was a different circumstance because his dad died when he was so young. He doesn't really remember him. So he kind of had to grieve this person that he never really knew. He has like little glimpses of memories, which was wild to me. Like he'll say like certain events he can remember of him, but he has to fully learn about him through me. So, he is grieving it like, well, why don't I have a dad? And like, why does this person have a dad? Can't you just go and buy one? Like, it's like their little minds are so amazing, but they're just so innocent. You know what I mean? But if you talk about those things, innocence is not going to go away. Right. It's just going to, build their character on the inside. I think, I never wanted to keep secrets. I always wanted him to be really open about his questions. And, even if they were hard ones, it's right. Just, I want him to be a man who is secure in his feelings when he's older. Like he doesn't have to hide things from a partner or family, whatever. Right.
I think that's, so well said regarding making sure that he's able to be the best version of himself in that sense. And, I think one thing you were talking about before, which I would like to delve in just a little bit deeper, when you talk about needing to be mom and dad, and sometimes as a parent, it's hard enough playing our own role. Now you're in a position where you have to play two roles. And I'm curious how do you even go about making sure that he's getting what he needs from both aspects of things, but I'll say even more importantly, how does mom make sure that she's doing what she needs for herself? Because wearing a mask is okay for a little bit, but sometimes having to wear it for like long periods of time can be really hard. So how do you go about balancing it within yourself first before you even separate it? And I'll talk about dealing with your son separately.
Yeah, self-care is very important. I definitely put that aside for a long time. I think as a solo parent, especially as a widow, it's just such a complicated situation because when you're a mom or a parent in general, you kind of get lost in being a parent and it kind of becomes your identity a little bit until you kind of snap out of it and you're like, whoa, like I had a life before this. Like I can still be that woman or that person as a parent. And I think it took a really long time to find that person again, just because of losing my mom and then his dad so closely together. But I self-care is so important. Like I make time to go to the gym, you know what I mean? I make time to sit down and read a book, go outside, whatever I have to do. But I think if I take that like hour a day that I could find, it definitely has helped tremendously.
It's awesome. No, it's all, and I love the fact also that it's not one thing. It's not like I need to do this every morning. If I don't do this, then my day's screwed. It's more like there are different things that it can do at different times. It's sort of like, the way we deal with food or sleep. We're not going to get the same thing every single day. So we have to be able to adjust. When it comes to self-care, it works the same way. And when you talk about this, making it more of a priority, when did you start saying, well, I need to do this? Because it's sort of the fuel that lets the the mommy engine continue by doing the
Yeah.
self-care. So what was that point where you realized that this is really important, and taking care of myself is something that is of just as important as priority of making sure that my son has his dinner in a certain way. So
Yeah.
how do you make sure that it's there?
I just put it in my schedule. Like, I go around my work schedule, around his school schedule. Like, I just have to find, even if it's at 9 o'clock at night, like, I'm going to get on the Peloton, or I'm going to do yoga
Right.
or something like that. Like, I just have to do it for my mental health, because there was many years, of the first years of his life where I was miserable. I was very lost. I didn't, it wasn't my plan to parent alone, but that's I was just pushed into it. So it took me a really long time to navigate a journey, and it still does. It's still not easy. Like, I don't think I'll ever get used to having to parent with just me. It's just, it's different for everyone. I think people don't give themselves enough grace, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, that is very important. And I think the way I talk about it in my office is that inner self critic, which we all have. And sometimes it's very loud, and sometimes we know how to say, shut up. Sometimes we don't. And I think that's important to sort of know that what's happening right now. How am I feeling? And where do we go with that? And the way I talk about it, at least in my office, is, can we make a U-turn right now? Can we go inside and see what's happening? Where are we? And how can we make sure that we're dealing with everything that we need to, and taking care of ourselves? And like you said, going on a Peloton, just doing a little of yoga goes so far regarding everything else that's going to get taken care of. And the example I like talking about in my office is, you got the best car in the world, but every now and then it still needs to be shut down. We still need to be able to make sure that it's has its rest, and that's really, really important. And I think that goes without saying when it comes to parenting, which is a lot more important and more expensive than a car in many ways. Making sure that we're doing those things that are also so important. And I can't even I think I can't stress it enough when we talk about that self-care of how important it is. And how do you make sure also that as much as you're taking care of it for yourself, but you make sure your son has it as well, and he has his things. That's not necessarily about that imaginary friend and about making sure that he's dealing with those things, but he also has his own priorities. And there's so many things to balance, but I think at the same time, making sure that, I guess you could say, his engine is shut off like a 9-year-old can in a certain way. How do you make sure that it's balanced for him properly as well?
He's very scientific minded. He's very a routine person. Like, he's like a little old man sometimes. It's so funny the way he likes to regiment his day. But he plays guitar, he does swimming. Like, I can tell if he's in a funk, which is very rare for him. He loves to talk about happiness. You know what I mean? Like, that's big for him. And I don't know if that's like he's overcompensating for something, but it's just, he has his thing. Like, he just loves to do what he does. And, we spend time and do things on the weekends when he's out of school of what he wants to do. And sometimes he just likes to sit around the house and be like, I don't want to go anywhere. You know what I mean? And that's what we do. We'll sit at home.
That's great. Exactly. That's awesome. That's really awesome. So, my next question was going to be sort of like, how do we teach resilience to a child in a certain way? But it sounds like just by being there with them and being able to have a certain conversation, that goes so far in itself. Being able to make sure that they're getting their needs met, and when they have a certain thought and they talk about something, that itself is great. You were talking about happiness, and about that being something that your son is able to be aware of and understand and want to be able to work with as much as possible. Is there a book or something out there that you found that has been helpful when it comes to talking to a child about happiness?
I wouldn't say there's a book. I think for us, when we do therapy sessions together, we have had a large list of vocabulary words for each emotion. And that's been super helpful. He loves to stay in the happiness category. He's a little fearful of the other, but he's grown to understand what sadness and mad and all of that is, all the words that come with it.
Right.
But I think being uncomfortable sometimes it is what gets you kind of through the hurdle of being able to talk about other things. And I think the last year, especially as he's gotten older, it's really shown.
I love that. I think the concept of being comfortable with the uncomfortable is so important. And it changes with different ages and different emotions, different situations. And at least in therapy, and you might be familiar with this, something that we talk about is the biopsychosocial theory of things. Our biology, our psychology, and our sociology is different in different situations. Specifically talking about our biology and our makeup of who we are, what's happening to us physically. We talk about our sociology, what's happening around us, and we talk about our psychology. Those three things and the recipe of those two things is different every single day. And we want to make sure that we're dealing with it in the best way possible. And sometimes just being able to sit and do nothing or just stay home is the best recipe for today, and making sure that we're doing it in the best way possible. That's awesome. And I think a parent knowing that, whether you're a single parent or even if you're a multi-parent household, to understand the concept of being able to, that's okay to be here in this type of situation, I think is really, really helpful. And at least from our conversation, the way it's going, it sounds like, just being able to hear from you how you've been able to navigate and do certain things. It's also sort of helped your process of being able to write and be an author in a certain way. And I'm curious if you can talk about what that process has been like of being able to have all these feelings and emotions inside, but yet being able to go ahead and put it down on paper in a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of was a book that just kind of happened by accident in my mind. We were laying in bed one night when he was like, God, 3, and it just kind of popped in my head, and I just wrote it in my notes app on my phone. And, I had finished school I went back to school when he was like really little. I had like a year left, and, I got my bachelor's, and I was like, I have to do something with this. You know what I mean? And it kind of just happened on my phone one night in the middle of the night when he wouldn't go back to sleep. And now it's here, and it's crazy to, he was a big part of it. And, the character looks like him, and he helped me take a lot of illustrations, and, it was very hands-on with him, and he loved that he got to be a part of it. So it's been a really cool experience.
And it was a project in a way for you and him to sort of work on together. Like, what type of input and how were you able to use his amazing but yet also youthful insight to sort of help you write a book in this type of situation?
Yeah, just watching him grow up, and the questions he would ask about my mom or his dad, and just kind of weaving that into like, those are normal things a kid would ask if they didn't know somebody, but they know that person was a huge part of them. So I just really tried to keep his experience, I was very mindful about his experience and what it still is now. And as he's getting older, how it's going to change every year.
Yeah. Oh, literally. It's something that I'm sure you've seen change from the questions he's asked. And, I laugh about it now, but there's a certain understanding of like, you were saying before of him being able to, can you just go buy another one? When it comes to dad, I think that's something that, it's coming from a real sincere place. And the mindset is something that, they're really sincere. They want mommy to have another daddy so that I can have a daddy like everyone else has a daddy. And as they get older, they sort of get to see certain things, how it works or how it doesn't work, and how, the concept of loss and stuff like that. How have you been able to sort of take his questions and take his way of thinking and internalize in a way where what you're writing now is something that you're publishing and putting it out there for other people to sort of share as well and hear from you?
Yeah, I think the beauty of the current age and, my generation is just like we've done things differently. You know what I mean? Like I don't have a conventional life. It's not like how it used to be, I mean, would I have loved to have that life? Of course, like that was the whole mindset. But, now that I'm in this, I'm like, I don't know. I can't picture life the other way. I mean, yeah, it stunk. What happened? But at the same time, it's like, this is just what our norm is. And it's okay. And he has great, men in his life. He has my father, I have a partner, and, he's wonderful. And he sees these great male role models, my sister's husband. And it's still there. It's just different.
Right. Very different. But at the same time, that becomes the new norm for him.
Yeah.
In a certain way. So we didn't touch on this before, but going back and talking about your mom. So obviously, there's a certain sense of grieving that you didn't have a chance to sort of experience, just because you said she died while you were expecting your son, and your mindset and you're just taken over by what's happening to you physically and psychologically and emotionally, and then you're wanting to grieve, and then you give birth, and then you're sort of in this other place. Just regarding things for, I guess you could say, survival, for lack of a better word, in so many different ways, right? So there's so many things you need to take care of for yourself, and you still haven't grieved yet for your mom, and then your husband dies, and then you want to be able to sort of grieve that. How has the grieving process been something that you've been able to navigate for yourself, and is that something that you've been able to sort of write about as well?
It's weird because when my mom had died, she was very sick. She had cancer for 8 years, and it was a very different journey of grief at the same exact time. Grieving her and then, grieving him a year later. It was just very strange, when you have a parent that's dying of cancer, you know what's coming when you get a certain diagnosis, but you don't ever know how to deal with a parent dying. Especially when I was young. I was like 25 when she died. And then with the circumstances regarding his father's death, it was kind of, he had overdosed. So when he had relapsed, Preston, my son, was, like 6 months old. And, it's kind of like when you're on the other side of addiction, you kind of grieve that person while they're still alive.
Mm.
And that's kind of how I think I dealt with it, because the person that I had, been with wasn't really there anymore, unfortunately, due to drugs and stuff. So it was weird. I think more so it took me a couple of years to be like, wow, I didn't grieve anything and I need to grieve that.
Yeah. And that's a very good point. And it sounds like you sort of like you took that memory sort of put aside, or like maybe this is to be filed later, so to speak, where like, maybe this is something that we'll sort of deal with it in the right time. And then, this is where it sort of leads to the next question. We talk about the concepts of legacy and memory. So, let's start with your husband first, and your son's dad. And yes, he was going through this horrible sickness that he was dealing with, and he had a relapse. But at the same time, the memories that you want your son to have are positive. So how do you go about compartmentalizing in a way where his dad is still his dad and it could be on a pedestal, but at the same time, making sure that he understands what happened in the right way, shape, or form for his age and appropriately? How do you go about juggling that?
It's a hard balance. I think I had to heal a lot first before I could really talk about a lot of things. He'll ask me certain questions and like, oh, what happened? This and that. And I have to really be mindful of what I say. I never would want to paint a bad picture of his father to him. Because I am the only person who can tell him about him. So, it's been hard to really explain, that dad's brain was sick, and that's just the most appropriate way to put it for an 8-year-old at this time. And then just tell them stories about like if he has questions, but it's just, a lot of navigating my own grief and just taking a minute to really collect my thoughts before I actually answer the question.
It's so beautifully said. And I think, realizing the biggest thing I'm taking away from this regarding parenting, and, my wife and I have 5 kids. And I think the biggest thing that you talk about is asking questions and embracing questions and encouraging questions, because I think that's one of the most important ways to deal with emotions, to deal with our thoughts and anything we need to express. There's no such thing as a bad question except for the one not asked. And there your son is asking a question. I mean, just the fact that you ask a question, why don't you just go get another one? Like there's some vending machine out there where you can buy another dad. But I think the concepts that you've allowed him, you've invited him to live a life of asking questions that has allowed him to grieve and process the way he has. And I'm sure that's been so helpful for his growth and how he's dealing with things, whether it's from the spouse that you're currently with, or your dad or his uncle. There are so many different things that he can associate with a positivity because of the life that you've given him. And I'm curious if you could talk for a minute about how a parent can make sure to give that segue or that permission to a child to see those things when there is some negativity that might be involved and why a parent is not around anymore, whether it's in loss or whether it's in divorce, and making sure that there's a way to be able to talk to the kids where, yes, there were maybe some flaws, but it doesn't mean that the person themselves was a bad person or they are a bad person. How would you go about talking to parents about that?
I think it's just really important that if you talk to a friend or if you talk to a therapist, that you learn to not, to really put your stuff aside if you have any animosity towards that person, in a divorce, or if it's lost, has what it's hard. I mean, there's time if I'll vent to a friend and be like, you know what I mean? But like, I'm not going to do that to my son, like I just want him to have a peaceful, loving, happy home. You know what I mean? That's been so important to me, just because the first year of his life was really hard, it's just so important to me. And I love that he's just, sometimes I'll just sit and watch him and I'm like, he has such a peaceful life. And I'm like, I did so good. You know what I mean? Like,
That's awesome. I'm so glad you can see that. And you show grace and gratefulness to yourself that you can see that. It's really, really amazing. I mean, there's so much research out there that shows that, trauma for a child can even be in utero, it can be in infancy when they don't have memories, but they can still feel and hold on to that trauma. And I think the ultimate opposite of what trauma is connection.
Yeah.
That is the antithesis of what trauma is. So when we embrace it, I know the way I talk about it in my office is the same way trauma happens because of relationships, for the most part. So that's like PTSD and more, stuff like that. But for the most part, trauma happens because of relationships. The way we heal from trauma is through relationships.
Yep.
So you created a world where you're able to go ahead and see your son in a light. We're like, oh, damn, good job. And I think that's like so amazing that you have that feeling within yourself, which also shows, and the thing that stood out to me as you were saying that also means that shows the work you've done on yourself, so you can actually say that. Because if you were wearing very, very dirty glasses, you would not be able to see that within your child. And this goes back to what we were saying before, that in order for us to make sure that we're doing the best job is to take care of ourselves and having that self-care, going to therapy, embracing that, because that is the first step to cleaning our glasses to make sure that they're clean enough so that we can see the things within our child. And to say that, there are going to be bumps in the roads, and that's something that is very much a part of what this journey is. And I'm curious if you can sort of talk about that for a second regarding knowing there's going to be big crevices in the ground. There's going to be huge boulders to climb over, and making sure that we're dealing with them in a way that I'm not going to pass all the tests and I'm not going to get flying colors on every single thing that I do here, but I can do certain things well, and therefore that's what's going to keep me going. How would you talk to parents about the concept of that adversity regarding dealing with so many things that come up? And maybe there are specific things that come up that no one would have realized unless you've actually gone through things. Maybe you could talk about that for a second as well.
Yeah, I mean, it took me a really long time to get to this mindset. I think I felt a lot of guilt the first couple of years that I wasn't doing enough as a parent, that I was too depressed or I was too sad to really do it for him, And, I kind of just, one day I was just like, I'm done. I'm not going to feel like that anymore. You know what I mean? For what? I didn't do anything wrong. You know what I mean? We're only in charge of ourselves, but that's a reflection of your children too, as you're raising them. So I think, I think as he gets older, I think I just have to remind myself, okay, we went through this and I got there eventually, we'll get there again.
I love that. And then it's also being able to sort of show him, hey, look what we did. And, I think that goes so far just regarding, yes, there's going to be things that are hard to climb, but yet we have each other. And we're going to do things together in a certain way. And, now there's someone else that's, you have a spouse that's sort of there that also comes into play. How do you go about making sure that there's a proper balance between paying that respect, knowing what his roles are as your spouse, but yet also wanting your son to have a father figure? How do you go about dealing and navigating that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard when, when a child loses a parent, and, to death, and it's just, they know that you have one dad, but you could have someone in your life who can still be that figure for you. No one's ever going to replace him, but there's still someone you can talk to and go do fun stuff with. And they're always going to be there, no matter if it's grandpa or uncle or whatever, it's been really important. He's so aware of other people, their emotions and everything and their energies. And he's just it's wild to experience him, the way he connects to people. It's on another level.
I wonder where he got that.
That he, but that's also really exhausting too, because, he's a big empath and I'm the same way. So it's he's had to really learn, when he's ready to be quiet or when he just wants to sit around and, who he wants to connect with and when he wants to. He'll just be oh, can we FaceTime my uncle? Or, and stuff like that. He has his own thing down. And I kind of just try to follow his lead, we've been doing this together, me and him. We've been a team,
right. Yeah, and hopefully it's a team that's lasting for a very, very long time over here. I'm curious, two more things just to sort of touch up on the subject. And there's probably so many different things that we can talk about over here. But the role of, I guess you could say, the the both cultural and maybe spiritual aspect that may come with someone going through grief. And I'm curious what that was like for you, and what would you talk about with a parent or parents that may be going through something that both the culture that their person is in and their own spirituality, maybe even religion, comes into play regarding dealing with grief and loss when it comes to a spouse and dealing with a child.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I feel like we are more spiritual. I never really raised him with a specific religion. I kind of wanted him to just navigate that for himself as he gets older, and do his own research and believe in what he wants to believe in. I think it's such a hard topic because people believe in so many different things. You know what I mean? I feel like, he asks about prayer and stuff like that, because people at school will talk about, oh, I'll praying for you, like, stuff like that. But it's just, I think everybody needs to figure that out on their own. You know what I mean? And if he needs the guidance, I will guide him. But I think he's very smart, and he kind of just is the type of person that's like, no, I'm going to believe in this, and that's it. You know what I mean?
And how do you make sure that it's taken care of within yourself, so that you can have that comfy, healthy zone for your son, and dealing with so much loss and grief that you have over the past decade?
Yeah, I think for a really long time, I was very angry.
Yeah.
And I had no interest in any spirituality or anything like that. And I had to really sit in that for a really long time. But I met like a really great group of women who, were really into, Reiki, and I did a lot of acupuncture, and that is what worked for me. It brought me a lot of peace. And I feel like that's kind of where my path is taking me at the time, you know what I mean? And it's just, that's been really helpful for me.
That's amazing. I'm so happy that you found that. And I think that's something that I hope people are, when they're hearing this, is saying that there is no one way to go about this, but find the thing that works for you. And I think that's really important. And something else you just brought up, which I'm so happy you did, because I think it's really important, is community. And I think that goes so far when we're in life in general, but it's specifically when it comes to grief, when it comes to loss, when it comes to parents going through things in general. I'm curious, can you talk about that for a minute, regarding how to find that, how we can work on that, create more of it, and where people can make sure that this is something that works for them?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, when people first die, everybody is around, and it's very loud, and you don't want it to be. And then it gets really quiet really fast. And you're like, okay, like, I need people around me. I'm lucky to have some childhood friends that I've known my whole life who have stuck by my side, and their families, But I think as you get older, as a mom, it's really hard to make friends, and you become friends with your kids, friends, moms, and everything. I've got a great group of those. But, I also have, other older women who I've met through, my partner, who have changed my life. You know what I mean? This one woman in particular, she lost her husband as well. And she's just such an awesome human being. And she's, I've really learned a lot from her, even though she lost him after I had lost my husband, but I just think that if you could find a connection with someone, even if it's something similar they've gone through to experience, because not a lot of people are going to understand what it feels like to become a widow. You know what I mean? Especially when you're younger. So I think it's important that, you seek people out. I mean, like, don't be afraid to make friends.
And get out of that zone. I think the thing that, and I just I follow James Clear, the one who wrote Atomic Habits, which I highly recommend. And not a plug for this, but something that could be really helpful. And it was an email that just went after him saying that when you're having that funk, to physically move and to go around, do a short yoga video, find something on YouTube, just to sort of or listen to some relaxing music and go for a walk. When the body gets moving, it's much harder for the mind to stay still. And I think that was such a profound statement to hear, actually, is what you're saying, is that it's going to get quiet. And if it does, or if it is quiet, move. Get out there where it's not quiet. Mm-hmm. Do something. Now, we're not, I don't think what you're saying here, Kelly, is that, go to a rave party. That's not that you're saying as well. Those days are over. I think, the second you become a parent, I think that rave and parents don't go in the same sentence. So, so I think that's something making sure that we find the right place and try on a few. I saying that I talk about in my office a lot is when it comes to therapy, and going back to what we sort of started earlier, finding the therapist that works for you is like finding a house, a spouse, or a pair of shoes. And sometimes you have to try on to find the one that works for you. And I think when it comes to finding your community, and like you're saying, there's so many places that we have nowadays. Thank God that like we didn't have a decade ago probably as to what we have today regarding finding your community and going on social media, finding those things that can be helpful to you and in your neighborhood where you are. And sometimes you can find things that are online. There's so many amazing opportunities for us out there to find that community. And I'm glad that you did. And I think that's something that every parent that's going through something, especially going through grief, is something that is really, really important. My last question for you over here, because again, we've covered so many different areas, and I'm so glad that you've been able to share this very, very needed wisdom with us, is the role of the others. Now, what I mean by that is, and it's something that I was thinking about when I knew we were going to having this interview, is looking back and now, I'm sure there are so many things that people have said either not meant to be insensitive or hurtful, but sometimes could come off like, what in the world are you saying? And obviously we talk about, having a filter is always the best thing to have in a mouth in general, but at the same time, what type of guidance would you give someone that has someone in their life, whether it's someone in their community, a family member that is going through loss, going through grief, and something that you wish would be, like I said, bullet points out there for them to know when it comes to how to deal with the family?
Just be there. I mean, words aren't always necessary. Sometimes, silence is okay, even if you're sitting together. Sometimes I think people just need presence. And that was a big thing for me. Like, even if someone was just sitting there, like, I don't even want to talk. You know what I mean? Like, I just need to know that, like, I'm not by myself physically. You know what I mean? I think that's the biggest thing, is just presence. Be there for people. And, it's hard to not say things, but I feel like sometimes when you try too hard to say something, you say like the craziest stuff. You're like, oh, why did I say that?
So just making sure that there is you're doing what that person needs, not what you think is the right thing.
Exactly. It's kind of like, when you're in a relationship, you have to love another person in their love language. You know what I mean? You have to learn what works for somebody else. What works for you isn't always going to work for somebody else.
Right. And making sure that you're doing what they need. I love that. I love that analogy, and good call on the love languages aspect. I think that can be really helpful over here. So Kellie, we've covered so many different things over here. Before I wrap up and get some rapid fire questions, I'm curious if there's anything regarding both the grieving process, but also your book that we haven't, that we haven't talked about, that might be something that could be helpful to the audience here.
Yeah, I just think, as if you have a child that is going through even a loss of a grandparent, just, open the table up. Don't be scared to talk about anything. Like, don't be scared to cry in front of them. Don't be scared to get angry. It's going to help them not hold everything in as a kid, and especially as an adult. I feel like it's so important. Like, these kids are our future. They're the ones who are going to be running the show when we're old. Like, you want strong, leaders and emotionally stable human beings. And I just think it's so important to just don't be scared to talk about things with your kids, especially when it comes to death and grieving.
Amazing. I could not have said it better myself. And I thank you so much for that. Before we finish up over here also, where can people find more about you? How can they get in touch with you if needed?
You can look me up on Instagram. It's at Kellie.Kaminskas. I just launched my book cover today, so if anyone wants to go take a peek at it, this is my proof copy, but it has a little funny line on it. But this is the book right here, and it'll be out probably the second week of July. So I also have a website. It's just my name. It's KellieKaminskas.com, where I lazily blog sometimes.
Amazing. And you said social media, they can find you where again?
Kellie.Kaminskas.
Okay, and we'll have the links in the show notes as well. But this has been absolutely amazing. As we finish up over here, Kellie, I'm curious to hear from you if there is whether it's another blog or YouTube video or maybe a book that deals with the topic specifically that we've been talking about today that you would recommend to others.
Oh gosh, I really loved, when my son's dad first died. There's a book called Breathe, Mama, Breathe. I forget who the writer is, but it's kind of like not really a devotional, but it's just like for moms to like take a minute. That was really helpful for me to kind of just, stop everything and kind of just be in my own space for a minute. But I really loved that.
It's amazing. I will try to get a hold of it. And if we can, we'll also post a link for that in the show notes. Is there someone in history that you would feel comfortable or you would like to have as a babysitter for your son? The person cannot be related to you.
Taylor Swift, obviously. I'm a big
Well,
Swiftie over here. I just feel like she's just like a good human being.
amazing. All right. Well, and my last question for you: if you can think of an everyday, mundane superpower that you would like to have as a mom, what would that be?
Oh God, more arms, more arms to do more things.